This video is it's about 6 things that political parties or governments that tend to do well in terms of service provision do. So I'm going to list them. They are not implemented exactly as I say them, but at least some variation of this. The first thing is about the values of the party or the government. For most of them that tend to do well, they tend to be people-centered. So people-centeredness. The second thing is strategic planning. So the first thing you see is the government or the party is people-centered. And then the next thing is they plan. So they plan in the interest of the people. The third thing they do is implement the plan. Because it's one thing to plan, but it's another thing to implement the plan as exactly as you planned it. The fourth thing is to evaluate your plan. So you would say, oh, this is what we implemented. Now let us see how we did. After you evaluate your performance, you now account for mistakes, for successes. So for successes, you replicate them. For mistakes, you look for a way to correct them. And then the last part is the way forward. So for mistakes, you correct them. For things that succeeded, for successes, you replicate them. So for countries that, for example, plan for 5 years, then after 5 years, they look at their plan and see, okay, this is what we achieved. And then in the next phase of a plan, if they have another strategic plan, then they say, okay, this is what we will avoid. Now, most countries do those things. The failure in many African countries, or in any country in the world, is the issue of accountability. Accountability is avoided because parties or governments are not people-centered. If they are people-centered, then everything they do is always in the interest of the people. So if a government says, for example, in a strategic plan, that they will build, in the next 5 years, they will build, say, 20 secondary schools or 2 universities, say 6 intercity or interstate roads, or hospitals, schools, and then after the end of the period, say 5 years, they come to the people and say, this is what we've achieved. This is where we failed, and this is why we failed. Maybe the failure because of resources, maybe because of finances, or maybe because of skills shortages. So they let the people know, so that in the next phase they correct them. Now, in many African countries, parties and governments are not people-centered. They are leaders-centered. So they end up not building schools because the kids don't study, or they study in private schools maybe in the capital, but in the rural areas in the towns, they are neglected because most of these leaders live in the capital. So the kids go to good schools in the capital. If the universities, they send their kids abroad. For medical services, they don't build good hospitals because they fly away anytime they're sick. They don't build roads because they use planes. So as long as you're not building, you don't operate based on the interest of the people, you don't build anything. So that's why you see in some countries now that if a journalist criticizes the leader, they get arrested. Or if they insult the leader, they get arrested. Why? Because everything is leader-centered. In the US, even the Trump administration, Trump was one of the most dangerous dictators of fascists, but he could be criticized in the US, but he didn't arrest people. He was angry, yes, he wanted to arrest them, but he couldn't because of institutional protocols. Being people-centered, planning, implementing, evaluating the plan, account for the failures, and then rethink way forward. If these things are not implemented, nothing happens. So when it comes to corruption, every country, even in Canada, we had cases of corruption with our Prime Minister. There are corruption cases everywhere in the world. The US, the UK, Germany, France, there are corruption cases. But the difference is there's a process in which people account. So people are held accountable. So the corruption cases, they are processes. But if you don't have those processes, if you don't account for what you do, why would you care how you spend the money? You can embezzle the money because, no one is going to hold you accountable.